I met the Rudolphs exactly 50 years ago, in 1966. They were in Delhi. I had just moved into Delhi, and somebody told them about my having been recently involved in the study of educational institutions in Karnataka, which was called the Mysore state then. And they got in touch with me and invited my wife and me to have tea with them at Madan's, where they had a suite, and Amelia and Jenny were little children, and there was an ayah, and it was just like a kind of a home setting. And they asked me about what I had been really doing in this area of research on educational institutions. They said they were themselves interested in the subject. And I said that, well, I had really been looking at Christian, Lingayat, Muslim, Brahmin schools to find out how these traditional institutions are bent to modern purposes, because I had been looking at engineering colleges and medical colleges and things of that kind. And they said, well, that's exactly what we are interested in. And so we had a chat, and we separated. We decided we would meet again, but about a month later they sent me a letter saying they were organizing a conference in Delhi on politics and higher education. They would like me to make a presentation at that. This was to be in the summer of 1967. And so I did, and the book came out in 1972. And what was remarkable about that book was the range of scholarship they had been able to bring together. But more than anything else, what was remarkable about that were the editorial introductions. And you could see that seen into certain aspects of the contributors' work, which we ourselves hadn't. I think the book is no longer very much in circulation. It was published in India also, in the US and in India, but it's a remarkable document in the study of the theme of the modernity of tradition. Fast forward to 1984. We became friends when we visited the US. We visited them when they came to India. They visited with us. And so the years rolled by. And in 1984, I wrote them or called them, I don't remember, from Cambridge. I was going to be teaching during the fall at Harvard, and I said I was in the US and I'm sure I would come to Chicago sometime. And this was followed by, probably a week or two later, a letter from Susan, who was the chair of the Asian Studies Center at Chicago, saying that after you are through with your present assignment with the anthropologists, you come over to Chicago as a guest of the Asian Studies Center for the winter. And we are booking a place for you in the International Scholars Guest House, and you both come and spend the winter with us. But come December, my wife was getting very, very anxious because our children, our daughter was appearing for her final BA honors, and our son was appearing for his final MA in economics at the D school, and my wife wanted to come back to India to be with them at that very important period in their lives. But she was very nervous about letting me live alone in a place called the International Guest House for Scholars, or whatever it was called, because I wear a hearing aid, and at night I remove it. And she was always worried, I don't know why, that there may be a fire at night. and you won't hear the fire alarm. And she was getting really very anxious and not being able to decide. So I called Susanne and I said, can you reschedule this? Can I come maybe later in the year or next year? She said, what's the problem? And I explained it to her. And she said, give the phone to me. So my wife took the phone, and in a couple of minutes, her face lit up with a smile, and something nice was being said. And when she put down the phone, I said, what's it? She said, I'm going to Delhi. I said, so suddenly? What happened? She said, because Susan said, you're going to stay with them. That's what Robina was talking about a little while ago. So I arrived in Chicago in February '85, and I stayed in the house for 3 months. And soon a pattern was established. I would be the first person to wake up in the morning, come down in my pajamas, pick up the New York Times, glance at it, into the kitchen, and begin emptying the dishwasher. And then Lloyd would come down, all dressed for the day's work, open their cat food cans. Their 2 cats, a Persian called Ravi, was fat and indolent, and there was a Siamese, Morgan, who was very temperamental. And so Lloyd would fix the food for the 2 cats, and then set up his coffee apparatus, and opened the can of tuna fish, which was an essential part of his breakfast. And by that time, Susan would come down. And so we sat down to our breakfast, Lloyd to his tuna fish and black coffee, and Susan to her boiled egg and herbal tea, and I to whatever. And then the brown bag lunches, and I said, now this is one condition I want to make as a guest. No brown bag lunches for me. I do not want to participate in this American way of the midday meal. So they would go, I would go later and have some hot lunch somewhere with some other friends. And the weekly get-togethers, which Romila mentioned. Their daily evening dinner was a formal thing. Sat down to dinner. Actually, Susan would start cooking. And Lloyd would make the salad. He would make the dressing every evening. And Scotch would be there. And Susan would put on her apron and do the cooking. Sometimes she made bangan ka bhutta and dal. But usually that was not what she did. And I asked her once, I said, you must be so tired. You've been out for the whole day, you've been teaching, you've been advising students, you've been attending meetings. She said, but look, this is the only time I get to relax. So, okay, there she was cooking, and then Lloyd would lay the table and the candle, the 2 candle stands, and we sat down, had dinner. And once a week, there were all these dinners they had for friends, 8 to 10 people. And what a remarkable flow of people through their house the weekends. People from India, people from England, Americans, all kinds, Nobel laureates. I remember Prime Chopra coming one evening. I remember Ishri Ahluwalia coming one evening, Milton Friedman, all kinds of people. A college lecturer from some agricultural college in Mysore, who had discovered an impressionist painter in New York and made him famous. And so he came, all kinds of people came. There was food, there was conversation, and Susan had one shot coming as a hostess, which made her so charming and endearing to me. She would feel sleepy. And so you could see that she was beginning to doze at the nearing the midnight hour, then the parties would disperse. So that's how I saw their daily life. And very often, Susan would start a sentence, Lloyd would complete it, and the other way around. And then I discovered that they did not always, both of them, read a particular book. One person would read it, Lloyd would read it, or Susan would read it, and tells the other person what there is in it and what you might like to read in it. And the way they wrote papers. A draft is made by Lloyd, say the essay on Gandhi, one of the recent things, postmodern Gandhi, and she would go over it, or she would write the first draft and he would go over it. And I said to them, it's very unfair to all of us. You guys have not 24 hours to the day, but 48, because you supplement each other so well. And it was a marvelous experience living with them. And then there's so many things to recall. Come 1987, it was the 40th year of the Fulbright Foundation. And they had a program of inviting people from various places to give the Fulbright lecture. And they were looking for people who would host these lectures, and I happened to be one of the people who was invited. And when this letter went round, Susan immediately wrote to me. She was the president of the Association of Asian Studies, you mentioned that. And she said there is an event at these meetings called the President's Plenary, and I wanted to speak there. And I said, what on? She said, anything. You choose what you want to speak, but it should not be more than 40 minutes. It should not be less than 40 minutes. I must have 4 copies in advance so that I can give them to the 3 respondents. I said, who are they going to be? She said, I haven't made up my mind yet. And eventually I went and gave the lecture in Boston. And it was very interesting, the kind of respondents she had chosen, of whom I knew 2. She had chosen the historian Ainsley Embry and the anthropologist Stanley Tambaya. And the third person I didn't know, a political scientist, a Japanologist called Susan Farr. And so the lecture was given and the respondents spoke, and there was a cocktail party. And one of the people in the audience was Stephen Graybard, the editor of Daedalus. And he came up to me and said, I would like to publish that. I said, fine. And I walked up to where Lloyd and Susan were standing, and I said, oh, well, he wants to take the paper. And Susan said, nonsense, he's not going to take it. We're going to have it. So the address was published in the Journal of Asian Studies. But what's remarkable about it is not the essay itself, but the introductory note which Susan wrote, which combines so beautifully in a page the personal and the professional. And I really cherish that page, that opening page of that article. That's 87. 98, one morning in Delhi, I get a telephone call from Susan. She had a marvelous sense of humor. I'm afraid Lloyd didn't quite have that sort of a keen, sharp sense of humor. I get a telephone call from Susan. She said, look here, Lloyd is too reluctant and too embarrassed to ask you something. And I said, come on, I'll do it. She said, we have to write a paper for your book. I said, what book? She said, no, the book, which is... Then she said, hold a minute. I didn't say anything about the book. What are you asking me about? What book? But I didn't say anything about any book. I didn't know what was happening. Was I losing my mind? Was there a crossing of lines? And anyway, we talked about something or the other. But I became a bit suspicious about this. And sure enough, without my knowing it, some friends were trying to put together a book for me, and the Rudolphs had been invited. And Lloyd wanted to ask if he could use an older paper on Amar Singh. Amar Singh's diary was mentioned, where he had tried to make sense of Amar Singh in terms of an anthropologist studying his own society. And he had woven into this paper some things that I have written. And, it was a very interesting paper in itself, the Rudolph paper. But what's interesting, the way Susan was able to switch the conversation in a way which left me puzzled. And then when we met later that year, I had almost forgotten this conversation. And before saying anything, Susan started laughing. She said, "So I fooled you." And things like that come to my mind. 2014, they were here to receive the Padma Bhushan, and we all met at Shah's house. And after that, they said, "Why don't you come for dinner to spare ourselves?" So I went and met them in the hotel, Lloyd and Susan and their son Matthew. Food was ordered up into the room. And we chatted about various things, and she showed me the Padma Bhushan, the one which is the real thing, and the other which is a smaller replica which you can put on your jacket. And it was a very nice evening, and I know the shadow of death was there, and she did talk. I don't ever remember her talking about her illness, but Lloyd did, and he told me the kind of the state-of-the-art treatment he was getting. And then as I was leaving, when nice dinner, and they opened a single malt, the fashion of the times, and we did justice to some of it, perhaps Susan more than the others. And then as I was leaving, she had a wheelchair, but she also stood up without it. She stood up and said, "I don't know whether we're going to see you again." She picked up this bottle of single malt. She said, "You take it with you." That's the last time I saw them. After that, a letter last year, when they sent me Destination in India, and I said, "I would like to review it. I have never reviewed a book of yours." So they said, "Fine," I did, and I sent up a copy of the review. Amelia or Jenny, I think Jenny, wrote a letter saying how much they enjoy reading the review. And after her letter came a mail from Susan telling me what the girls were doing, where they were, and what Matthew was doing. Of course, Matthew, when I lived with them in Chicago, one of them was at Harvard, and Matthew was at home. So, there we were. My mind goes back again and again. They had a visitor's book at home, and I found my own signature in it several times, and then I became a resident that I was occupying that room. And Susan would say, "You are the resident visitor's bookkeeper of this house." And all kinds of people in there. One of the names I can recall just now, P.V. Narasimha Rao, who had stayed in their house. So it's an unusual, gifted, warm couple. A rare privilege to be able to say that they were good friends of mine. Thank you.